Dropping the heat. girl not touching on no and the girl wind up your body, girl bounce it, bounce it, bounce it, bounce it. Wind up your body, girl you're proud of your body, girl bounce it, 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 bounce it.
Hello and welcome to Fresh Air. I'm Joe. Hello.
And I'm Dave.
Ah, there you are. Good. I was hoping the stream was working properly. I can see a couple of issues on the actual stream that's coming through right now. It's not picking up Discord for some strange reason. Oh, and there you guys are.
I can see us now.
Yeah. I don't know why that happened. Okay, so you're here. That's the important thing. So tonight we try and be a little bit more PG as we're dedicating this episode to discussing philosophy for kids. And we have a very special guest for you tonight. He's someone I met on Twitter about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than that, and it was when I had just started really digging deep into morality myself. So I was basically flexing my own understanding, talking to different people about it, and seeing if they could poke holes in my reasoning so I could strengthen my position and realize where I was weak. I spent a lot of time discussing this particular topic with him, and eventually we started having loads of different conversations about various philosophical topics. I introduced him to Dave and some of the other guys from the Fresh Air and Answers in Reason, and now he has been inspired to do his own podcast where he is essentially teaching philosophy to kids through a number of different stories. I introduce to you the host of Little Philosophers, Josh. How you doing, Josh?
Hello, Josh.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Not too bad. How's yourself today?
Pretty good.
I figured this intro tune was appropriate because it was a remix I did of Children years ago, and today is dedicated to children and philosophy. So, we probably need to start at the beginning and actually find out what indeed inspired you to do your podcast in the first place, Josh.
Oh man, it depends on how far back you want to go, I guess. So my whole transition from being a theist to atheist really sparked the philosophical nerve in me, and really got me thinking a lot about philosophy, and then I met up with you guys a couple of months afterwards after I got into Twitter. Um, I got yelled at by about by
Oh,
a
hang on a
bunch
second, Josh. I
of my
don't know if that's
family
my end or
members
yours, but
because I was on
we
Facebook,
lost you there for a second.
and they didn't appreciate.
Sorry, say again. You said
Nope, he's
sorry,
still
we
there.
lost you there for a second. I think you're back though. You mentioned that you met us a couple of months after you first joined Twitter, and then it went crazy after that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I originally got on Twitter because I was told that I couldn't talk about the stuff on Facebook. So I
Really?
made myself a Twitter account. And like I said, I met up with you guys and dogs
Oh,
making a bunch of noise.
I seem to have lost you again there, Josh.
So I met up with you guys and really got into the philosophy. And you still lost me?
No, you're back again. I don't know if it's my end or yours. I
Okay.
do apologize for this.
It might be mine. My connection isn't that great because I'm up basically on the top of a mountain. So so we got talking about philosophy a lot, and I have three. When we first started talking, I had two sons, and I realized that there wasn't anything out there for kids. Some of these big questions, there's stuff that these kids start asking when they're 3 or 4 years old. Um, why am I here? What's this life about? Um, you know, they're largely metaphysical questions because they can't get, they obviously don't have the details yet. But yeah, I started reading some of we always read them books at bedtime, and we usually do like 3 or 4 books every single night. And I started realizing that these children's books are just packed with philosophical questions and subjects. And I was like, hey, I'm going to start looking into asking my kids philosophical questions about the books after I get done reading them. So I get online and, just Google around and see if there's anything out there. And I ran into it's the University of Washington has their own philosophy for kids section,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
there's a group of PhD philosophers that go around in Seattle and they go to elementary schools and they teach kids philosophy. They do exactly what I wanted to do with my boys. So um, I took that idea and I kind of ran with it. I searched online and it's nowhere to be found um, that's accessible to everybody. So I was like, I've never started a podcast. I don't really know what it entails, and surprisingly, not much. So I just started recording myself, reading some books, and asking some questions, and here we are. Um, I made the Facebook website, and now I put little. It's basically like a 6 or 7 sentence um, slide about a philosopher or some sort of philosophical jargon. Um, just a brief description to help kids kind of get into it.
No, it's definitely good. I've seen the slides you do on the Little Philosophers page and group, and they're actually really fantastic. They really simplify the issue into like absolutely simple language that enables people to understand. And obviously, if people are interested by that, they can look into it and get that much more deep. You somehow encapsulate these really complex concepts into these really simple paragraphs that you get on there, and it's just like yeah, that makes sense. That's basically what it is, and that is something that might fuel anyone's fire to find out more information, whether it's the adult or the kid. It's that nice, simplistic bit of information that can make go, oh, is that? Oh, I need to know a bit more about that. They're absolutely fantastic. I love the little cards that you do on there. But Josh, obviously, you
Great.
mentioned that seeing all this philosophical content in your books is what one of the things that inspired you to do the podcast and have these philosophical conversations with your kids, or at least just ask them a few questions and get their minds thinking. But why do you feel philosophy is actually important for kids?
Well, if you go to any of my internet sites, basically, um, it, the reason I'm doing this is because the availability of knowledge out there is not the problem anymore. When we used to go to school, it was we had to go to the library, we had to look things up in a textbook, and you were actually learning this stuff. You had to go somewhere to access information, and now you have everything literally at the tips of your fingers. And it's not just the good stuff. There's
Yeah,
also a lot of bad stuff out there too, right?
yeah,
So,
definitely.
uh, so philosophy, I believe philosophy is the best way to weed the good out from the bad. And something that I always say, and I can't remember if I picked it up somewhere or if I actually thought of it myself, but it's teaching kids how to think, not what to think.
And you feel that that's one of the key benefits to starting younger, because obviously a child's brain may be more malleable than, say, an adult who's already made up his mind on certain things. If we can teach kids how to think about things when they're younger, that might help them make better decisions in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think there's any
It
other key
helps them get a
benefits
better
to?
grasp
Oh,
on the
sorry,
world around them.
sorry, you cut out there. I thought you'd
No,
finished.
you're good. Um, so I guess the other benefits are, just getting a grasp of the world around them, being able to understand things without always having to ask questions to other people. They can ask questions to themselves, and and the other thing is creating their own kind of like self-identity. I think philosophy um, it turns your thoughts inward a lot. It um, a lot of questions are, what kind of person are you? What kind of person do you want to be? How should we treat other people? I mean, morality is huge in kids' books. Um, but there's also things like, what is art? Is nature part of art? Um, what's real? What's not? There's a lot of ontology. What makes up our world? What should we include in our ontology? What should we not? And it, when it comes to gray areas, how do we figure that out? Which is where epistemology comes in. So it's all that stuff. I always get nervous. I get nervous with some of the stories that I do because I think I'm gonna ruin kids' imagination. Um, Introduce them early to um, to the real world, and it's hard to tightrope that when you're a parent. I've thought about that, but I guess when the time comes, when they've developed a certain um, amount of knowledge about the world and start asking questions about certain things, we need to be honest with them and
Mhm.
just be upfront with that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. So you mentioned ontology, epistemology, and morality. Um, do you think those are the most important topics to try and teach kids, or are there any others you think might supersede them?
Um, it really depends on the age. The past couple of days, I've been looking at some childhood development stuff, and Erickson's got stages, and then I think you pronounce his name Piaget. Um, Dave, did you do any of this stuff when you were doing your psych BA,
No, no, no.
childhood
Unfortunately,
development
not.
stuff? No. Oh, okay. Um, let me. So PJ it says that like around 3 or 4 years old, kids really start to they start to be really egocentric and see the world as they see it. And you can start with really basic like metaphysical topics with them. Um, but really, 4 or 5 years old is when kids' curiosity really kicks in, and that's when they start asking all the why questions, and everything you answer is just another why, and they go over and over and over again. Um, so yeah, like three seems like it's pretty early. I have a little guy who's going to turn 3 in October, and everything's still going over his head. Um, but my 5-year-old is he's really starting to pick up on stuff. So that's nice. Um, but yeah, I can get into some epistemology and ontology with him. Um, but yeah, with the little ones, it's just um, really, really basic questions, and they aren't really going to answer them. It's more like introducing them to the questioning and having that be part of what you guys do and getting into a rhythm.
I suppose that
Not
side
really
can help
expecting
them a
too
little
much
bit
out of
as
it.
well. In the sense of instead of just going why, you might go, well, what do you mean by that, Daddy? Well, how do I know that that's true? And all of a sudden they're asking the same why question, but in a better way that actually gets an answer that might be more helpful to why they're asking why.
Yeah, exactly. They can, if you use Socratic questioning on them, they'll learn how to use it, and they'll use the language that you're using back on you, and then they can get more specific and more advantageous questions from them back from you.
So, with the Socratic style questioning, do you think that that is the best method to start them off on thinking about these things, or are there any other methods of teaching young children that you think work well?
I think that's really the only way to go. Um, until they get old enough to actually read things themselves, um, I really think you just have to start asking questions. Because there's no foundation, there's no baseline for them to work from. I, I think if you're going to ask more academic type questions, it needs to be for older kids, probably at least 8, if not like 12 and into your teens. Um, but yeah, the Socratic questioning is definitely the best way when you're talking about 4 or 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds.
It
Do you
teaches
find?
them. Oops, sorry.
No, sorry, go for it, Dave.
I was going to say it teaches them to sort of focus their investigations a little and focus their questionings that little bit more.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah, they
think?
don't even know enough to. Oh, sorry.
No, carry on.
No, I was just saying they don't even know enough to know where to start. So that's where those questions, you might only have to ask 1 or 2 questions, and then that could start them down a rabbit hole that they start asking you questions, and you never know when you're gonna, end up.
Do you find that depending on the age group, you have to really refine the language, or do you think you can ask basically the same question to any age group? It's just there are some more advanced questions that you wouldn't necessarily ask someone who's younger.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of language that, especially for somebody who is doing self-studying with philosophy, um, you get into like some of the jargon and some of these really complex words that we use that are really deep and very specific in meaning, and they just don't, they don't have that at their fingertips to use yet. So you have to, um, I hate to use this term, but you really have to dumb it down.
Yeah, I know what you
You
mean
have to
by that.
use like, yeah, very very broad, simple terms, and that makes it incredibly hard. Um, like like those slides that I make, trying to do um, like Descartes in 7 sentences for a 5-year-old to understand. Like it, it probably took me hours to put that slide together. Um, I forget who. I think it was Einstein that said, "You don't truly know anything unless you teach it to a kid, like a six
Yeah.
or 7-year-old."
Yeah. There's a
And that's really
similar
not true.
saying that we actually have
I
in
can't.
work. It takes longer to write a short email. And that is just saying, obviously, if you put all the detail in and you have this really, really, really long email, you can tap that out in a second. But if you actually want to refine it to something someone will believe that is concise to the point but has all the detail in just a few sentences, it will take you far longer to actually get what those few sentences are. But you need to learn to do that, because if people see this long email, they're not gonna read it. And to your other point on all the terminology, I've said to Dave before, there are times when I'm reading an article online from SEP or somewhere like that, and I spend probably more time looking up the words that they're using than I actually do reading the actual article, because it is, some of the language that is used is very complex. It's not something you meet in day-to-day life, which is why, I mean, I'm constantly stunned by these slides that you've put together that are just like, oh, that's really easy to understand. I wish I'd seen that before I'd bothered reading that SEP article. It would make more sense to me.
Well, the other thing, when you're coming from, I basically I have no formal training in philosophy. I never took philosophy classes or anything. So I'm starting from scratch with with a lot of these philosophers and a lot of these concepts. So I have to get a general idea of everything that they're about, and then try to figure out eh, what really highlighted their philosophical career, so I can, you know, eh, give that out. You know,
Yeah, definitely.
it's really tough.
Just wait till you have to do Wittgenstein.
I think I just finished Locke, and I'm kind of going in chronological order.
Oh, nice.
So yeah,
Yeah,
I got a lot of work ahead of me.
I think that's one of those things that will never really stop, if anyone's truly honest, though, are they? When you're looking into philosophy, it doesn't stop.
No. But that's the point. It's like a ongoing and evolutionary thing, philosophy.
um, so, what do you think are some of the better stories that you've covered that are good for moral lessons? Say someone out there was to either listen to your podcast or maybe pick up a couple of short stories for their 3, 4, 5 year olds to try and teach them the basic right from wrong, good, bad. What are the best stories you've come across so far?
Um, well, it kind of depends. A lot of things are pretty specific with their morality. Um, the And if you're looking for just scope, the Aesop's fables are probably the best as far as like a scope of a lot of different types of morality all in one. Um, but you can talk about like Sneetches was one of my favorites from Dr. Seuss, and I decided to do that right around the time that the whole Greg Floyd thing came out, and that's about identity and discrimination. Uh, that was one of my favorites to do.
Oh, awesome. Um,
Um,
In fact, on that note, we should probably put a few links to a few of yours in the when we actually publish this one after the stream, because it'd be useful for people to hear your work, and we'll also include some links to the suggestions Josh made as well.
Yeah, go out and listen because it is fantastic.
and they're all under, except for Velveteen Rabbit. That was about a half an hour. All the rest of them are like under 10 minutes. Uh, the actual podcast itself is pretty short because I really just wanted something where you can press play and it jumps right into the story. And there's not me doing housekeeping stuff and talking about, all the things going on in my life. Like that's really wasn't what I was after with this. So uh, it's just a short intro. This is the book. Um, and then I read it. I read the whole book. Well, starting with a couple of stories, I've only gotten permission to do like 50% of the book, so I have to start picking and choosing what I might do in the future, what it's going to give us the best benefit for questions and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's under 10 minutes, but I'm hoping that the podcast, by the time you get to the end of it, it's 45 minutes, because after I read the story, I give everybody 10 questions, and I put in 3-second pauses in between each one of the questions. And the point is for me to ask a question, and then for you to hit pause on the podcast and actually talk with your kid about, whatever the question is, whether you're sitting in the car or hanging out at home. Um, and I also use that same kind of verbiage with the question. So I try to make it low level so even the kids who are just sitting down listening to it by themselves while you're off in a different room, uh, they can get something out of it. Or maybe they pause it and they come to you with a question and they're like, "Hey, what does this mean?" And you're like, What the hell are you listening to?"
Or, perhaps, as you say, they might listen to it as a bedtime story, and it gets their mind thinking. It influences their dreams. And I mean, your podcast is available in a number of different mediums. You're on Spotify now, aren't you? Under Little Philosophers. I think
Yeah.
you're. Yeah,
Um,
I'm sure I've
I,
subscribed to you on there. But you can
I,
also be found on. Take it away.
oh yeah. Um, pretty much anywhere you can pull up a podcast, you'll probably find me. Um, Anchor is part of Spotify, and there's like nine or 10 um, sites that go off there. And then I found a couple of other um, podcast sites that I've put my RSS feed out to independently. So,
I'm
um,
just showing the people at home what your logo looks like. Yeah, the three little kids, and that's the Little Philosophers podcast on Spotify. But as Josh says, you can get it on a number of different places. Um, Honestly, check it out. Play it in the car. Play it to your kids. Let them make some choices. Make up their mind. Get all those neurons firing and thinking about things in a much better way. It's honestly such a fantastic way to bring things to your kids and teach them a number of different topics that they wouldn't have necessarily thought of before, and the way to think about them. They're still going to make up their own mind, and obviously we understand kids might not have the same critical thinking skills that an adult might, but as Josh has said, it teaches them how to think a little bit better at an earlier age. And I honestly, before Josh did this, it was in my head to do this. I was even thinking about reading, like recording myself reading stories like Simon Blackburn's Think, and then just sort of trying to play it on repeat in my daughter's bedroom and just like seeing if it helps her think. But I don't have to do that now. As soon as she's old enough to get interested into a story, all I need to do is put my little echo in there and say, Alexa, play Little Philosophers, and all these stories are going to come on, and she's going to come to me in the morning and she's going to go, Daddy, what on earth do you think? Blah, 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 blah. And it's just going to be like one of those questions that blows my mind. And I'm going to go, I haven't got to that episode yet. I don't know.
Does it take you long to come up with the questions?
um, the first 5, no, but the last 5, yeah, usually takes a couple hours. If the book's straightforward with what it really wants to talk about, um, if there's um, a definite allegory there, it's a little bit easier. Um, if I had to, and I had an entire day not to do anything, I could probably do one front to back in a day. Um, but yeah, usually if I can record 2, I can get 2 done in a week.
But
With like
that's
a
pretty
normal
good.
schedule.
That's really
Yeah,
good
it's
going.
not too bad. One thing that's nice about only reading 5-minute stories.
Yeah. Did you ever hear back, by the way, from Stephen Law about the philosophy files? Because I know he said that if it was up to him, he'd let you do it, but it's the copyright was with what was the words he used? I can't remember.
Publisher.
Publisher, that's
I
the
can't
word.
remember who the publisher was.
Uh,
I think I might have reached out to his publisher, but I do have a copy of the one that they didn't publish. It's still just kind of hanging out there. So I definitely might do that in the future. Um, but his stories are they're very to the point, and he almost does the philosophy for you.
Hmm.
in his stories. Um, so it actually kind of takes away from the experience a little bit because you want something that's that's not made for, philosophy. It doesn't have the questions included in it. It's just a story about some fictitious characters, and it teaches them to like pick that stuff out of the books themselves.
Yeah, you want something where you've got to kind of tease it out of the story itself rather than have it in your face.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think both approaches are definitely good. I definitely agree with the way you do it, though, Josh. But equally, for an older kid who hasn't been introduced into philosophy the way you do it through your podcast, it might actually be beneficial to have this other method. I mean, I bought the complete philosophy files for my son, who's 12 years old, and he went through it, and as you say, the questions are in there. He tells a story where one person is asking another person a question, whereas what you do is you tell a story and then at the end you ask some questions about that story. Um, and it actually helped him think about things. It's like, oh, I didn't really think about it that way, or that way, or that way. There's new dimensions there. And I've been trying to get him to actually listen to your podcast, but he's hit that stage where if he's not doing something on his computer, he's oh. So you need to get in there earlier and get your podcast on whilst they're still young and impressionable.
Have you got any favorite stories so far?
My favorite stories?
Yeah.
Um, I've always loved Sneetches, so that's always been a great story. Um, Probably the most surprising one for me was Pout Pout Fish. It's for really little kids,
It was about the
and
second or third episode.
yeah, yeah, it was. I think it was the second episode because I did Ish, which is about art for the first one.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, but then I did Pout Pout Fish, and it's about how, um, you know, he thinks he's sad. His 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 lips droop, so he's always got a frown, so he has to act that way. And I thought it was going to be about like controlling your emotions and the fact that we can't control what emotions we have, but we can control how we react afterwards. Yeah. But at the very end, this fish comes by and just kisses him right on the lips at the end, out of nowhere. So I ended up talking about consent. It's weird how some of these stories come about, and you're like, she kind of snapped him out of it, but what if some random person just came up and planted a kiss on you? Like, you should probably ask first. And that's an important thing for kids to know.
Oh yeah.
uh,
But yeah, most of them follow the story, but every once in a while you get throw a curveball. In the Aesop's fables can kind of do that too. You can catch a curveball with some of those as well. Most of the fables are intended to hit on one specific moral topic, but I try to do two. I do five Aesop's fables because they're really short, and then I do two questions for each fable. So finding the second one is can get kind of dicey, or you can play off the first question.
I'm guessing there's a few Aesop's fables you've got to kind of have to miss as well because they're definitely made for another time.
Um, yes and no. At first, the first couple of episodes, I thought I would skip some, but I've decided that I'm not going to.
all right.
Um, I decided I'm just going to let it go. And um, if one character gets eaten by another character because they did something wrong, then, or there's a decent amount of violence.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
wanted
there
to
is.
exaggerate, or because they want to exaggerate the consequences for some of these immoral actions. So, and they were written at uh, anywhere between 1000 BC and the current era. So, um, yeah, so they can be a little bit gruesome, but I don't think we should hide things from kids like that. Um, Especially when it's just characters. It'd be one thing if they were human characters in a human story and somebody killed somebody else. Like that might be a little different. Um, but it's a fox that goes around back behind a tree in order to get a bird up in the tree. But little does the fox know that by playing a trick on the bird, there's a dog waiting for him around the other side, and
Mauled.
he gets caught by the dog. Yeah. So um, so that's kind of part of it.
Do you think there's any stories though that are really not necessarily for their violent content or anything like that, but actually for another time? You know, it's something that might have only applied a couple of centuries ago, and actually its moral was not necessarily what we would regard as moral today.
I haven't found that. I
No?
found that they're from the ones that I've read and done so far, it, they're pretty much timeless. They might they might hit on something that um, you might think of as something in the past, but you can always flip it and you can always turn it into something relevant.
That's the thing about morality, it's kind of timeless.
It is. I
Yeah,
mean, we could get deep into a conversation about the relative morality versus not. But I don't think we need to go focus too much on morality tonight. And as you say, there is a timeless aspect to these moral lessons. Um, but equally, there are certain things that were perhaps once thought of as moral that were maybe now judged not as moral. But as you say, Josh, there aren't any that you've come across that you actually read and go, "Oh my god, I can't say that. That's so bigoted," for example.
yeah, they're usually not like that because they're usually the characters don't have gender and usually they're animals. So it's really pretty politically free. Uh, Animals don't enslave each other, um, and it doesn't really talk about a lot of the social issues that we think of as being politically incorrect nowadays because they weren't even thought of as issues when these stories were written. I mean, there really wasn't a thing. There really wasn't like homosexuality as like a political thing at 200 BC. You know, it's not something somebody would write stories about.
No, the stories are more about cultivating virtue in kids and things like that.
Yeah, as far as the stories, probably the one that was most packed with philosophy has got to be the Velveteen Rabbit. Uh, there's just so much there. You know, these toys are talking, and they're having discussions and decisions about things, and then they talk about what's real, and the toy think it becomes real just because of the way somebody else feels about it, and then at the end of the story, it actually becomes real. So uh, there's so many things to talk about that I got my 10 questions in 10 minutes. You know,
Nice.
with that
Nice.
with that book, you know, it's just with those big subjects, it's really easy.
Do you ever find yourself having to whittle the questions down so you have too many and then kind of have to focus and pick out the best ones?
Yeah, um, usually I get to 10 and I kind of just let it sit. I'm like, it already took me a decent amount of time to come up with 10. But by the time um, by the time I read it and publish it, I maybe have thought a couple of times I've read this story and actually done the podcast and recorded it, but not published it, and then went back and recorded the questions again because I thought of better questions or things that might be better off for the kids afterwards.
But you always keep to 10 as your magic number. Why is that?
I I think it's a good amount. I think that more than 10 would definitely be too much. And some of the subjects I like to go a little bit in chronological order with a question, so I might ask like a series of 3 questions in a particular order, and then go on to like a different subject. Um, so that's kind of nice um, to help the kid. I don't want to push them. Like the whole thing's about teaching you how to think, not what to think, right? But you also kind of want to guide them in a certain way so they get the point of the story. Um, and a lot of that's to also help the parents too.
Have you ever considered trying to guide the story beforehand? Listen out for this and that. Trying to get their mind, trying to, before they even read the whole story, you just say, think about this subject and get to the end. Or do you think that would be ineffective?
I think it would be effective, but I think it's also a double-edged sword because, um, believe me, being a dad of 3 boys, you never know how they're going to take it. And I don't want to preempt something something else like amazing that they might see in the story, or the way they might take it a different way, or ask different questions, or you know, if somebody preempts you with questions, you're gonna look for the answers to those questions while the person's reading the story, instead of just listening to the story and just taking it in for yourself. So yeah, I've thought about that. Um, I've started publishing all of the questions in the descriptions and on the websites, um, all the social media stuff, so the parents can see what questions I'm going to ask. So if they want to go ahead and preempt the kids with some questions, or hey, I think we might be talking about this with this story, then that's good. Um, but yeah, I don't want to bias them in any way any more than they're already going to be.
Yeah, that's fair. More than fair. Aside from the teaching philosophy to kids, though, Josh, what is your favorite topic to discuss yourself?
Uh, Personally, I love morality. Um, I think uh, I think it's one of the more open-ended subjects in philosophy. Um, I think once upon a time ontology used to be a lot of fun to talk about, but with the scientific discoveries that we've made about our natural world, I just don't find it as interesting. Um, there's there's still lots of questions left, but there's not uh, definitely not as much as morality. Um, you have the problem of consciousness and dualism versus monism, and uh, obviously the God question is a lot of fun to talk about, but morality is still something that's very applicable to our lives. Like every single day, you could change somebody's life with one conversation.
It has real
Talking
world
about
effects.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
and of the big ticket moral theories, so not the individual subsets, but if we were to talk about consequentialism, virtue ethics, and deontology, um, if there was one that you find yourself leaning towards more than the other, what would that be?
It's like so. I'm definitely a hedonist, with in utilitarian. Um, I love virtue ethics, but in my view, I think virtue ethics are built off from hedonism and kind of a utilitarian kind of thought process. Um, I think if people acted virtuously and just studied virtue ethics, they would be great people. Um, but the question I always ask myself is, how do we know? So if a virtue is just a way that somebody acts, um, that that produces moral actions on a regular basis, how do we know? Like, what normative thing are we giving to these virtues um, to assign them as virtuous or vice? So I
Yeah,
think
I mean,
that,
I'm with you
and I think
there.
underlying that is like a hedonism, utilitarianism uh, kind of basis. But
It's
like I
it's
said,
it's
I've only
kind of
been
like
doing this.
Aristotle said as well, though. It's you know the word that sounds like pneumonia, eudaimonia.
Yeah.
Pneumonia.
um, basically, human flushing. To live well and to do well is essentially that end result, and there is enough of an argument to say that that is actually what consequentialist moral theories like hedonism and utilitarianism and welfarism themselves are sort of geared towards as well. There seems to be a running theme throughout a lot of the moral theories that sort of do represent this fact. And I'm going to say not all of them. You know, there are some people who make arguments against it. Um, but for the most part, I think that if we think about the purpose of morality, there does seem to be this human flourishing aspect. And we can see that things like hedonism and utilitarianism do seem to represent this for the most part, but obviously, again, there are particular flaws that you can find with them. Um, I think the problem with virtue ethics is because it's not consequentialist. You're a bit like, well, how do I know if that's done the right thing? Because I'm not looking at the result. I'm looking at the behavior, and the behavior seems right, but the result is wrong. And I think
But I
that's
think that comes down to like almost an inductive reasoning. I think that um, I think that something is virtuous because the overwhelming majority of the time somebody has acted in a certain way and shown that it's for the benefit of the most people or creates. So the phrase I use is you know maximum pleasure over expected existence. So you're looking at how long do you plan on being around and how much pleasure can we get while we're still here. And that's not only for us. We also have to realize that um, doing well for others is also going to increase our own pleasure and maximize that too. But I think that deontology and virtue ethics are, we've figured out um, if we ascribe this duty, then we we can maximize that without having to make like Bentley's um, moral calculus. It's way too complicated for us to figure out. It's not really possible to think of everything. But over time, we have virtues and duties, and these things are things that we figured out um, just through happenstance. But when you act this way, the overwhelming majority of the time, you do moral things that benefit the most people and give us the most pleasure, the most well-being out of it. And the same thing with duties. When you follow this duty, the overwhelming majority of the time, we maximize our pleasure and utility and well-being for everybody.
I think you mentioned something there that a lot of people might not actually think about as well. Hedonism, for example, or hedonism, however you want to say it, is one of those things that people think is it's just someone who chases pleasure or chases happiness, for example, and that's what they base it on. But there's a little bit more to it than that. It's not just about your own personal pleasure that results in it being a moral action. If you are causing someone suffering, even at the minuscule bit of pleasure you might get, that would still be regarded as immoral. One other thing I need to interject there to anyone who might not have been listening to the Fresh Air podcast and things like that, the difference between the big ticket moral theories I was speaking of. A consequentialist moral theory is the consequences of the action um, is what defines if it's moral or not. So, say, for example, if I was to shoot a gun in the air, if it hit no one, it would not be immoral. But if it hit someone, it would be immoral because the consequence of my action. Now, intent does come into that as well, but at the end of the day, it's the consequence. Whereas we've got deontology, which is basically following the rules. And it's one of the problems. You've got a set list of rules, and it doesn't matter what you do as long as what you are doing is following those rules. So even if there is a negative consequence, as long as you have followed the rules, then you have been moral. Now, virtue ethics is a little bit different. Instead of it being sort of act based, it's agent based. It's the way you're behaving. So you've got these list of virtues that you have to balance within yourself and learn to act in a certain way. And obviously, there is consequences that come off of that. If you do find yourself balancing yourself in a perfectly virtuous way, all the consequences ought to be as good as they possibly can be, especially if everyone else is trying to do that too. But they're the three big ones, and there's obviously, especially with consequentialist moral theories, a large number under them.
So the big troubling question is, do you hang the innocent man to quell the riot and make everybody happy?
Exactly. So what Dave's going on there? It's a
Yeah,
thought
it's a tough one.
experiment. So if there's an innocent person that you could hang, and it would make 1,000 people happy, and other than that, we're talking about a closed environment. That's all that's going to happen. Under a consequentialist moral theory, that would be regarded as a moral action because you've caused one person suffering and 1,000 people pleasure that overrides that suffering. That's one of the problems with consequentialist moral theories. But obviously, real world application, that might not necessarily be how it works. But it is just to highlight that there is this particular issue. Under, say, a utilitarian theory, it would be considered moral to hang that one person.
Yeah, as a general guideline, consequentialism gives us a nice action guidance thing. If we think about bringing about the best consequences, it is a good way of bringing about some sort of action guidance principles.
But there is obviously the issue, like that particular example, which all of a sudden you have to think, well, there's something that tells you intuitively that it's wrong to hang an innocent person. So, I mean, Dave, how do we justify that? Say, if you were more of a consequentialist yourself, but actually you know that that's wrong, how do you then justify that?
Well, it's not wrong under consequentialism.
Yeah, but how do you define it as wrong?
Oh, well, I'm a value pluralist, so.
So how does that work?
Um, in other words, there's two ways to look at it. There is the overall consequences, and then which guide the actions and show us which are right. And there is also a further sort of thought about the overall circumstances. So if you break certain duties, then even though you brought about the best consequences, you might have done a few wrong things along the way.
And from that, I mean, you can get into the whole trouble of, or the problem of dirty hands, can't you? Can you do something wrong to bring about a good result? So I'm doing something that I know is immoral, but actually I have to do this immoral thing, otherwise a worse thing will happen. So it's the lesser of two evils, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that might be going a bit far for little kids, though.
Of course. But this was the section where I was interested in Josh's favourite topic, and if anyone is more interested in that subject, then we will be doing videos and podcasts on value and value pluralism in the future. But Josh, what's your take on that sort of thing? Those questions, those hypotheticals, where actually you can show that maybe consequentialism isn't the whole picture.
So I can't help but think that, um, given it, given that situation, what if you asked the person who you were going to hang if it was okay to hang them if you saved like 1,000 babies or something. It, if that person is also moral, um, then you might actually get their consent to do something like that. Um, speaking of the real world. The other thing, though, that comes to mind with me is this person is just randomly selected in most of these thought experiments. So, what is that going to do to everybody else's life and well-being if they know at any point in time anybody could be randomly selected to be sacrificed for 1,000 other people's happiness? I think that would decrease the well-being of everybody in that community and everybody, in that, in that place. To all of a sudden, everybody's walking around on eggshells because they don't know if they're the next person that's going to get chosen. So I feel like that amount of, if you're decreasing the well-being and the psychological well-being of everybody in your community, then that's going to outweigh any kind of benefit that the 1,000 people are going to get from picking that guy out.
I agree with you. It's one of those hard things with thought experiments, though, isn't it? You're given like this little bit of information, and you can always add on that. Well, what if, what if, what if, what if? And I think you're right. You know, in a real world situation, if that was applied to a community, they would all be worried that they were going to be the next one selected the next time everybody needed to do it. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they wouldn't think about it at all. They just cheered on any time it was someone that wasn't a family member, and it did still please most people. Maybe it's not as randomly selected. Maybe there's a specific target for a specific reason. You know, none of that information is given. That's why these thought experiments are quite closed case. In this instance, I think you'd agree yourself that it's not necessarily right for one person to be killed for 1,000's pleasure. But you add a fantastic point as well. If you got their consent, if someone said, "Yeah, do you know what? You can kill me, and it will please 1,000 people. That's fine." Um, then that does change the dynamic. Consent is a big thing, although there is a big problem with that in people's own right to their own autonomy as well, isn't there? There are people out there who might be willing to consent to that sort of thing, but they're told they're not allowed to, which is a completely different problem, obviously.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite, right?
Yeah.
Somebody else trying to tell you what to do with your life.
Yeah, and I mean, where does that fit in with everything? What right does anyone have over someone else's bodily autonomy?
I don't think anybody has any right over anybody else's bodily autonomy.
I think I'd agree with you.
I think that's one of the basic human, uh, I don't know. I call it a basic human axiom, but I've argued with you guys about that before.
It is a basic human dignity and right, though.
Yeah, I think we'd agree that it definitely should be. We think it is, but it's not necessarily always seen that way by a lot of people, especially a lot of people in power in certain states, etc. But I don't think we need to get onto politics tonight as well.
Yeah, I think this stuff might give kids nightmares.
Yeah. I mean,
doing
speaking
the
of
Machiavelli
which,
slide was fun.
yeah, I bet. Do you think there's any topics that we should really avoid for kids? Like, there's certain things that actually we just not until their brains are developed to a certain point can we actually present certain things to them.
I mean, probably nihilism and existentialism are part too complicated for little kids. You know,
Do you
you're
think
not
it
going
would
to tell
cause
a
existential
5-year-old.
crises? And nothing
Well, it might.
matters.
Well, that it's like if nothing matters and we don't have any real purpose to our lives, like they can't understand that you can create your own purpose, and they don't have. You need to build that baseline of epistemology, morality, and ontology to give them something to stand on. And then once they have some sort of foundation, uh, you can kind of pull the rug out from underneath them and and tell them, hey, This isn't just, we're not here really for any reason whatsoever. We're just here. But that's also something that's super cool. Like you're here without any purpose whatsoever. So take what take what you have and do the best with it that you can. And then that's where the morality comes in.
That sounds awesome. Dave, do you have any questions for Josh?
How important do you think epistemology is, and at what age do you think it should become important?
4 is usually the best time because that's really when they start ripping into the questions. Why? And that's the best way to, the best time to really ingrain them how to pick out good information from bad information, which is the big reason why I'm doing all this. Um, you see a lot of groups out there, and now we have presidents that are disinforming people and
Yeah.
giving out horrible information and anti-science propaganda, uh, and I try to pinpoint that in some of the books too. One of the ones I just did, I don't know if I've published it or not. But one of the questions is, should what your parents tell you all the time just because they're your parents? It's like, no. And I don't care if that's gonna throw a kink in whatever you got going on with your kids, but um, I love when my kids ask me why, and they put me to the test, and they're like, "Hey, wait a minute. I know you told me to do this, but why? Why do I have to do this?" It's a great feeling to be able to explain that to them.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I agree.
And it's hard as well, because sometimes you realize you don't know as much as you thought you knew. And that's why sometimes parents get pissed off, because we actually live off of a lot of information ourselves that we've just learned as kids, and actually we've just accepted it and we've never looked into it anymore. And there's these things built on things built on things built, and you go back and you go, there were a few times I got, Mum, when you told me that I should, for example, eat the crust off my sandwiches, and I asked you why, and you just said because you should. Do you know why that is something that people said? No, no, it's just what I was told, and it's just what I was told. Now there is some evidence. This is going into the science side of things that show that a lot of the antioxidants and goodness actually does go into the crust. But my mum could never give me a reasonable answer as a kid as to why I should eat the crust. It was always just because you should. And as a kid, I mean, I must have been the most annoying kid ever. I'm one of the most annoying adults ever. So just imagine me as a kid. But it was just, well, if you can't give me a good reason, then I don't see why I should do it. So I'm just going to peel off the crust. And that's sort of the sort of thing with philosophy. When you're asking a number of questions about why this is the way this is, what does it mean to do that, etc. So much of this stuff you don't actually ever really think about. And I think adults can benefit from your podcast just as much as the kids, because they can realize that maybe their thinking was a little bit sloppy on it, and they might listen to you and then go, right, well, actually, I'm interested in this topic. And maybe they can ask you, okay, you mentioned this thing here, this epistemology. I mean, where can I learn a little bit more about that? Because you seem to were talking about truth and belief and things like that, and I've always thought it was this, but you've opened up the world to me. Give us a bit more information, please.
Yeah,
Well,
I might. Sorry.
I was just gonna say one of my favorite things um, is when my kids come to me with questions and I don't have the answers, and I just tell them, I'm like, I have no idea. But you know what would be awesome is if me and you sat down for the next half an hour and tried to figure it out together.
Yeah,
That's
nice.
brilliant. I was just going to say I might be slightly biased, but I'm all for anybody trying to get anyone into philosophy.
Oh, just getting into thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Everybody gets so scared. with you say philosophy or you start to mention this kind of stuff, and people get scared. They feel like they're going to get overwhelmed, that they don't know anything about it, or that it's over their head, or that it's like this purely academic, you know, um, thing that they can't be a part of. And that's the other thing. I mean, you can get philosophy out of children's stories. It's not meant for anyone. It's meant for everyone.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I used to love Dr. Seuss because of the sort of inner details that it contains.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
and like the movies you watch when you're young. Um,
yeah,
After
all of it.
learning
There's
about
so
all this
many moral
philosophy and the
lessons.
philosophers, what? Go ahead.
A lot of philosophy for kids is moral lessons. It's teaching them to try and be good, isn't it? And there is more to philosophy than just the moral lessons. But in everything that we grow up on, there is tons of philosophy in there. And I think people don't necessarily realize what philosophy really is. Maybe it is soured by a particular branch of philosophy that has a particular nature to it, or maybe they're sound because they think philosophy's dead because it's not science or something like that. But realistically, philosophy is such a vast plethora of everything. Really, if it actually comes down to it, things like maths and science are extensions of philosophy. If you go down the branch far enough, in the same way that if we go back far enough, we are fish in our evolutionary path. It's just where we've come from. Um, so yeah, there is a lot of resistance to the term philosophy, but how else can you describe it? Describe what people are doing. How can you get that interest when there is that resistance there to the topic in the first place?
I think Josh is going about it the perfect way, to be honest.
I definitely agree. I don't think that there is, at least as far as I'm aware of, a better way to do it than what Josh is doing. And I hope that parents do listen along with their kids. But equally, I hope that parents at times do put it on as bedtime stories and stuff like that. I think it's a fantastic way to get an introduction to philosophy and just thinking. Really, it's absolutely fantastic what you're doing. I commend it on every level. I'm really proud of the work that you've done.
Thanks, I appreciate that. As you can see, I'm a bit of a fangirl. So this is the this is the first time I've got to actually like have an audible conversation with you guys, and it means a lot.
Yeah, it does to us as well. It's been great speaking to you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know time zones are a bit of a bitch, but if you can ever jump on and join us for any of our sci-fi broadcasts, you're always welcome. It's always great to have someone else there that can maybe ask questions that we might not think of ourselves and throw a different spanner in the works and take us on a different segue. We love that sort of stuff.
Someone smarter than me.
Uh,
So, Josh, before we
yeah.
sign
So
off for the night, is there anything that you wanted to cover off?
so I did just want to mention one more thing real quick,
Yeah?
and that's especially for parents. Um, Philosophy can also help your kids with their attitudes and their anger and how they conduct themselves and control themselves. There is a small branch of philosophy called Stoicism, and in Eastern philosophies, mindfulness is another big thing, and it's about recognizing that I kind of mentioned this before, that you don't get to control your emotions. Things make you feel the way that they're going to make you feel, and there's no change in that. But there's a way to control how you react to those feelings. And I've done a couple of books. Probably Mop Rides the Waves of Life is the best one that I've done so far. And I use it with my kids all the time. It's basically this little kid goes surfing, and his mother equates his big feels with big waves. and how he goes underneath the big waves when you're surfing. You duck dive. Um, it, you teach the kids the same thing. When they see something coming that's going to make them lose their mind and throw a fit, there's ways to teach them how to deal with that. And my kids' attitudes have gotten a lot better since I've read that book and done those questions. So um, it's not all just what is this life about, and some people would say meaningless or unanswerable questions. Um, a lot of things will you can affect you the next day or that night. There's a lot of real application you can have for a lot of these philosophical subjects.
Is Yeah, especially when you go back far enough, because that's what philosophy was way back when. It was more applicable to everyday life and how we reacted to it and how we thought about it. Modern philosophy is slightly different because it's more about asking the big questions, but when you go right back to the Greeks, it's more action guiding than anything.
Yeah, definitely.
And Confucianism is pretty good for that as well.
Yeah, isn't that where mindfulness comes from? From
It is.
Confucius, or is it Zen? Yeah.
I must say I like all the Confucianist jokes as well, although I don't think any of them are necessarily appropriate for a stream that's dedicated for kids. So I'll save them for another time when we discuss Confucianism and Confucianist jokes. Awesome. Well, I'm going to start this one off, and I'm going to say that it's been an absolute pleasure having you here with us tonight, Josh. Thank you so much for coming along. We appreciate your support of Advances in Reason and the Fresh Air podcast and our SciPhi broadcast. And we fully support you in your endeavors with Little Philosophers. You do absolutely fantastic work, and I really, really, really think everyone out there should have a listen. Even if you don't have kids, just have a listen to a couple of the different episodes, and maybe they'll whet your appetite and make you think about things in a way that perhaps you hadn't thought of them before. It's definitely worth doing. Please, please do it. Every single one of you. And if you do have kids, make sure they listen too.
Yeah, and Josh has the perfect reading voice.
It does. It's got a very nice timbre to it. Yeah. Yeah, but Josh, thank you, dude. Honestly.
Yeah, nice one, Josh. And it's great to have
Love you
finally
guys. Thanks
chatted
for
to you
having
face to
me on.
face.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Seriously.
It's been a whole year of WhatsApp.
Right.
And thank you for all your support and the conversations and stuff. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it has been fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Right. All right. This is the end of this stream. If you're still watching, we are pretty much over. I just need to press the bye bye button, which I've lost because I've lost too many screens.